Hello. What a week, what a day, what a month and a half it's been. So let's try work out how we got here, shall we? On the 7th of May, there were English local elections, Scottish Parliament elections, and Welsh Senate elections. Keir Starmer on the 7th of May lost 1,498 council seats. Those are council seats that run local councils up and down England. He lost 21 Senate seats. The Senate is like the Welsh Parliament. His Labour leader in Wales, who is also the First Minister of Wales, who runs the Welsh government, lost her seat, so she's no longer a member of the Senate. They lost 21 whole seats. They lost 5 seats in the Scottish Parliament. It probably would have been more, but in January, Anas Sarwar, the leader of the Scottish Labour Party, came out and said that Keir Starmer should resign. So he definitely separated the Scottish Labour Party and the National Labour Party, but clearly Keir Starmer still shook the Scottish Labour Party, and Sarwar was expected only 6 months ago or so to become the First Minister of Scotland. But no, he came in joint second place with Reform UK, who had a total of 0 seats at the last election. So he's come in joint second because of Keir Starmer with a party that didn't exist this time 7 years ago. Yeah, so that was a bad result, and something that's going to haunt the Labour Party at least for the next 5 years, if not for all of its history. On the 12th of May, 4 junior ministers resigned after a handful of parliamentary private secretaries had resigned. That includes the very famous Jess Phillips, who's the parliamentary undersecretary, which is a fancy title, basically just means minister, for victims and violence against women and girls. She's a very prominent minister, very prominent politician, and she resigned the government, citing the losses among various things. She's been on the airwaves quite a lot recently. A health minister also resigned, and 2 days later, his former boss, Wes Streeting, resigned. He was the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, one of the biggest roles in the cabinet, and he resigned. He also then said that he would probably run, or definitely run, for the leadership if Keir Starmer was to be challenged. We then had Josh Simon's resignation from Parliament. He was previously a staunch supporter of Starmer. He'd been a government minister. He's only like 34, so he's got a long career ahead of him, but he was embroiled in a scandal in February, resigned his seat, and then Andy Burnham became the Labour candidate. And Andy Burnham is somebody that the party at that time thought would be the best new Prime Minister to replace Keir Starmer, but he couldn't challenge Keir Starmer until he became an MP, so that's why he needed to win that by-election, because he was at that time he was the Mayor of Manchester, not an MP. After this whole by-election situation kicked off, John Healey resigns, citing defence concerns. He was the Secretary of State for Defence. It came as a bit of a shock, but not really at the same time. Defence spending was struggling under Starmer, but John Healey has always been seen as one of these neutral characters. He's he's definitely a Labour politician, but you could probably get away with appointing him as Director General of the BBC and call him a neutral guy. But it came as a shock to have possibly one of the people that could probably last through any administration resign, citing defence concerns. His personal private secretary, or whatever they call parliamentary personal private secretaries, something like that, also resigned. And then we had news that Dan Jarvis, who was the security minister, had been appointed as the new Secretary of State for Defence. A few minutes later, we heard that Al Khans, who was the Minister for the Armed Forces, who's had a long career prior to Parliament as a soldier, he's won loads of medals. People say, though his records are kind of a bit of a secret, people say that he's served in every armed conflict that this country's been involved in since 2000. So all of them allegedly. But he resigns, but because this happens a few minutes later, after Dan Jarvis is appointed, we don't know if his resignation is a response to Dan Jarvis being appointed or still following John Healey's resignation. I think he went on Laura Kuenssberg's show on the Sunday after. He basically said that there were rumours about Dan Jarvis's appointment, but at the time of his resignation, he didn't know Dan Jarvis had actually been appointed. Then we come to the Makerfield by-election itself, which it was being built up over many weeks. It was basically a battle between Robert Kenyon, the Reform candidate, who had a very questionable past in terms of his social media. And these are his words, he proclaimed that he was a sexist, which is quite the statement to make when you're then going to run for Parliament. But it was him versus Andy Burnham, who I've just mentioned, because it was Josh Simons who signed his seat for this Makerfield by-election. And we were expecting a tighter race. There were predictions towards the end that it was Andy Burnham, but we were expecting a tighter race. In the end, Andy Burnham won with 24,927 votes, compared to Kenyon's just 15,696 votes. So that's 9,000 votes difference, which is a surprising amount considering the fact we thought it was going to be a very tight race between them, because this Makerfield is like prime Reform territory. They all voted to leave the EU, whereas Andy Burnham always said stay. And they were 95% white. So it looked like somewhere that Reform would do great in, actually, but no, they lost 9,000 votes. well, they lost by 9,000 votes. So, yeah, that was the big shock of the night. But then we have lots of people coming out in support of Andy Burnham over the course of the next 12 hours. I stayed up and watched the entire thing and reported on it live. We also had two other by-elections that day. The Aberdeen South by-election, where the Conservatives, yes, you heard that right, the party that has been doing miserably, essentially, for the last 2 years, longer than that, 4 years, won their first Scottish by-election since the 1960s, since 2 years before we landed on the moon, I'm pretty sure. And then there was another one, the Abthorpe, I'm going to get this wrong, the Abthorpe and something Ferry by-election, which the Scottish National Party held. But those two by-elections were because two MPs resigned because they had won their seats at the local elections onto the Scottish Parliament, and there's, as of, I think, 2025, there's a law saying you can't hold both positions, so they resigned their seats. Or you can't actually resign as an MP. There's a big complicated process about it. You have to be appointed as an officer of the Crown, a paid officer of the Crown. But that's all quite boring. So that was the other big shock of the night, really, seeing the Conservatives climb to victory, taking the seat of Stephen Flynn, who was the Westminster leader of the SNP and is currently looking to take John Swinney's role as First Minister as soon as he can get his little claws into it. We've also now, because Andy Burnham was the Mayor of Manchester, which also has Police Fire Crime Commissioner role, there's laws against him holding a dual position as Police Fire Crime Commissioner and an MP, so he had to resign his mayoral position. So there's now going to be a mayoral by-election on the 30th of May, which I'm sure Reform are going to throw everything they have at that mayoral by-election. But I think there'll definitely be some strong candidates, because it's rumoured that Bev Craig, who's the current council leader of Manchester City Council, will be the Labour candidate, and she's quite strong. She's, I think, the chair of the local government association or something like that, Labour group leader or something. But we also hear that for the Workers' Party, which is this very left-wing party, their leader George Galloway will be running. He's a 3-time MP. He was a former Labour MP from 1983 to 2003, something like that, 2002. And then he left the Labour Party, or there was a scandal or something. He then won his re-election under his new party, Restore. So he then served till 2010 in a Glasgow constituency. He then came back as an MP in like 2015, 2016 in a by-election, I think, in the Bradford West constituency. He then lost his seat. He then came back in a 2024 by-election in the seat of Rochdale, which he held for about 3 months before the general election, and then he lost that seat. So that's interesting. But anyway, we come to today after 15 minutes. Yeah, so at 9:30 this morning, Keir Starmer resigns his seat. By this point, Andy Burnham's not even in Parliament, he's not even in Westminster, he sat on a train watching Starmer do this. He was seen in his black t-shirt, as he normally is, getting onto the train, but when he hops off the train in Euston, which I'm pretty sure is Keir Starmer's constituency, he was in a suit, which is unusual. We haven't seen him in a suit for about 10 years. So that was a shock, the little shock. Yeah, so Starmer resigns, saying that he'll set out this timetable for a leadership election. And then by this point, Burnham's not even sworn in as an MP yet. But yeah, he gets sworn in 5 hours later at about 2:30 with the other two new MPs, the Conservative and the Scottish National Party MP. He then gets heckled, with somebody saying he's not the Messiah. I think he responds by saying, no, just a naughty boy. He then has a quick conversation with the Speaker, who last time he was in Parliament, the Speaker would have been Deputy Speaker. Now, later, he's having his photo taken with probably about most of the Labour Party. By the looks of it, most of the Parliamentary Labour Party are sat in that photo with him. I think you've got Lucy Powell, the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, I think Johnny Reynolds, who's the Government Chief Whip and Parliamentary Secretary to the Treasury, or something like that, which doesn't actually mean anything, it just means Chief Whip. And then I think I saw Dame Angela Eagle, who replaced Dan Jarvis as the Security Minister, and she was previously a DEFRA Minister, and before that a Home Office Minister. Yeah, so that all happened. But back to the leadership election itself, we've got Keir Starmer says that nominations will open on the 9th of July and end on the 16th of July. And if there's nobody else contesting, it'll go straight to Andy Burnham, because he's already said he's going to run. He needs 81 MPs to let him become the leader, but the numbers say he's got about 200, so I think he's good. The only other person that could potentially get 81, Wes Streeting, the former health secretary that we were speaking about earlier, he came out today and said that he will not oppose Andy Burnham. He won't run against him. We're thinking there was a bit of a deal. He'll get either Chancellor or Foreign Secretary, two of the biggest offices you can get in government. So those are the only people. That's the only credible person that could possibly launch a leadership challenge to Andy Burnham and Keir Starmer, which means if he did run, there'd be election on the 1st of September. If he doesn't, it'll be a coronation for Andy Burnham and he'll become Prime Minister. The other candidates that could run, Al Khan's that armed forces minister. He's been proposed as the wild card or the dark shadow candidate. He could possibly run, but he's only been in Parliament for 2 years, so I don't know how credible that is, or if he could get the nominations. Darren Jones, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, and the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister and Minister for Intergovernmental Relationships. He's a staunch Starmer loyalist, but he did once say that he would resign from the government over the Mandelson files if there was revealed to be some shady activity there. But clearly Keir's got other ideas. I think he'd maybe work better as an administrative figure, which is why I think the cabinet office suits him quite well. So if I were Andy Burnham, I might keep him in. Maybe not as the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, that might be unwise politically, but maybe still as the Minister for Intergovernmental Relationships, or maybe a new appointment as the Paymaster General. David Lammy could run. Again, don't think he'd get the nominations. He's the current Deputy for Prime Minister and Justice Secretary. He was previously the Foreign Secretary. He's quite a credible guy, but he's just not somebody I think would fit the job of Prime Minister. Ed Miliband could run. Again, I don't think anybody would vote for him. He had his shot. He won the 2010 leadership election. He did 5 years as leader of the opposition and leader of the Labour Party. He lost the general election, so I don't know if the party would want him to come back. He's had his time. He's currently the Energy Secretary, and basically was the reason the Conservatives won in Aberdeen South. There's rumours that he might be appointed Chancellor by Andy Burnham because they struck a deal a while ago to see if they could get Keir Starmer out by May. But maybe because he's failed that deal, he might not get Chancellor. There's rumours that David might come back. David Miliband, his brother, who he ran against in the leadership election of 2010. He won, quite surprisingly, and David Miliband then shipped off to New York to be president of the International Rescue Committee. But there's rumours he might come back as Foreign Secretary. But I don't think that would happen. I think David's quite happy in New York. He's been there for 10 years. I don't think he'll come back just for Andy Burnham, of all people. And then the last potential leadership candidate is Angela Rayner. That was a very shoddy accent. She's previously been Deputy Prime Minister under Starmer before David Lammy. And then she was also the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government. She had to resign after a tax scandal that's now been resolved, but we don't know if there's been enough time, really, for her scandalous ways to leave her perception by the public. But I also don't think she'd run against Andy Burnham, considering they're of the same area and allegiance in the Labour Party, to the left of the Labour Party, so I don't think she would run against Andy Burnham. The entire thing's meant to be done by party conference on the 27th of September, meaning we could either have a leader in 3 weeks or we could have a leader in 3 months. So that's what happened. It's been a long month, long 2 years, 23 months actually. We'll see what happens. It's going to be interesting to see if anybody throws their hat in the ring for this leadership election, or if Andy Burnham is crowned, which is looking more and more likely by the second. The only other thing is Keir Starmer's speech outside Downing Street at 9:30 this morning was It was quite emotional towards the end. It was definitely different from other people's speeches. He spoke a lot about family and his wife Victoria and his 2 children. I think it's 2 children, which is quite different to think about somebody's like Theresa May. Her resignation speech outside Downing Street ended, "It's been an honour to serve the country I love." Yes, that's a terrible impression. Yes, so that's been the last month and a bit in a 25-minute long video. Now I want my sleep.